Hey there, friends. You may remember back in December or so, there was this, I guess, a little bit lesser known guy that had a spat with me somewhat in public because he came on my comment section and made comments about me fear mongering when I talked about the NDAA that was signed into law that was going to restrict at some point the firearm use, ownership, purchases, or whatever of military service members. Now, there were no specifics in there, and that's the thing that scared me. Now, because there weren't specifics, this other person thought, nothing to worry about. I'm smart enough to know that I never trust the government whenever they don't specify what they're going to do. And guess who was right? The federal government, more specifically the Department of Defense, came out with the Preventing Suicide in the U.S. Military recommendations from the Suicide Prevention and Response Independent Review Committee. Now, this is a committee of 10 people who are experts, and they're throwing $2.4 million at this. Why? Because the suicide rate in the U.S. military is astronomical. It's a ridiculous number. And it's specific to the military. In other words, we don't have that kind of a suicide rate outside of the military unless you want to include people who have transitioned sexually and all that. That's a ridiculously high, monumental suicide rate. But outside of that specific group, the military has a very high suicide rate. The DoD announced Friday the Department of Defense has taken note of the SPRIRC's work and will use it to enhance their current approach in 3 key priority areas. These areas include fostering quality of life, sounds really nice, building healthy climates and cultures, very nice there, addressing stigma as a barrier to help seeking, that's the third one. They said 3 areas, they list 4. The fourth one being, here's the good one, promoting a culture of lethal means safety. We have a new term out there. Lethal means safety. We don't want to say gun ownership. We don't want to say anything related to firearms. But if we call it lethal means safety, that means gun control. It's just a nice, cushy way to do it. I love semantics. I love the use of words. I love wordsmithing in general when people can really twist and turn and try to accomplish a certain goal that nobody would normally go along with simply by changing the types of words that they use. This is one of those cases. In this 115-page booklet that they put out, and let me say this real quick before I get started, I have no problem with people trying to mitigate suicide. I don't care if it's in the military or wherever it's at. I have a problem with the goal and how they're trying to accomplish this. Putting together task forces and things like that is simply window dressing. It's simply something to say, look at us, look what we're doing, if you don't have any real intention of forcing the outcome to be a little bit different. And there's nothing in here that does that. Let me point out the gun-specific things in here. Under the recommendations, and you'll notice the ones in red, of course, are high. They want to make sure those get tended to. And of course, orange is moderate and yellow is low. Go down to 512 and you will see that it says repeal public law, section 1057, and replace with procedural due process regarding the collection and recordings of information relating to the lawful acquisition, possession, ownership, carrying, or other use of privately owned firearm or weapon by military personnel and civilian employees of the DoD. So what they're saying is, they're going to create their new form, their own form, because they're the military and they're different type of due process. This is probably a cloaked red flag gun law that they're trying to, again, put cushy wording around it so that you will be okay with it. And of course, it's in a suicide prevention workbook. So how could anybody dispute that, right? 513 says, direct the Office of General Counsel to issue guidance that outlines how information about firearms acquisition, possession, ownership, carrying, or other use of privately owned firearm or weapon by military personnel and civilian employees of DoD can be legally collected by program evaluators. Here we go with the illegal collection of firearm information. They get way more specific than this, but this is just a hint that kind of puts their toe into the door to make you feel okay with them illegally collecting firearm information. The next one, 514, establish standards for DoD-approved firearm safety training requirements. Personally, I don't know why this is in a suicide prevention workbook, because they should already be promoting firearm safety, right? Whether they're training their folks with firearms on the range already, there should be adequate military training involved in that that has a certain level of safety involved. But if they want to have something outside of their normal military training, I'm okay with that as long as it truly promotes actual gun safety and the handling of firearms and suggestions that are going to make people safer as they're utilizing firearms, and not simply scold us and preach to us about how we need to stop purchasing firearms and who needs to have firearms and who doesn't need to have firearms. 514.1 require DoD approved safety training, including refresher and sustainment training every 5 years. I don't agree with having mandated training. I never agreed with that. I think any kind of anything related to this ought to be voluntary, and you shouldn't have to re-up it. If they're putting some kind of a 5-year term on this, then that's going to be a mandate. That's going to be something you're going to have to do, because why else would they require some kind of a refresher course in 5 years? It's because it's going to be mandated. 515, implement a 7-day waiting period for any firearm purchased on DoD property. I'll get back to that one in a second. 516, develop a national database for recording serial numbers of firearms purchased on DoD property. Okay, I'm going to get back to all of this little cluster of those in a second, so don't think I'm glazing over this too quickly. I'm going to move on and then come back to this group. 517, implement a 4-day waiting period for ammunition purchases on DoD property to follow purchases and receipt of firearms purchased on DoD property. 518, on DoD property, raise the minimum age for purchasing firearms and ammunition to 25 years. Regarding this cluster, these 4 right here, what you're doing is incentivizing the group of guys who might normally purchase a firearm on base to go off base and purchase these, because you're telling them that now you're going to mandate a waiting period if they purchase a firearm on the base. You're also going to create an illegal national database that will collect all of their serial numbers and firearm related information from that purchase if they do it on the base. They're not going to do that. They're going to go off base to do this. A 4-day waiting period for ammunition. Yes, I'm going off base to buy my ammo now. And raise the minimum age to 25 years. Most of our guys in the military, especially the enlisted guys, are definitely under 25. So all of these things they're going to avoid by going off base, because now they're not going to tolerate this. What do they give up by doing that? Money. They're actually going to pay more to go off base, because they have right now those military discounts on base that they would receive. Now they have to trade their freedoms for a discount, and most of them are not going to be willing to do that. 519, incentivize the acquisition and use of firearm locking devices by providing discounts for firearm locking devices purchased at a military exchange. Personally, I don't have any kind of a problem with offering a discount if somebody wants to buy some kind of a gun safe or a locking device that's actually going to improve on safety. If this is something that the person wants and they feel like this is the tool they need to improve safety in their own household, that's a great idea, and I have no problem with this one. 520, establish command notification procedures when a service member or family member who lives on DoD property purchases a firearm on DoD property. So now you have to rat yourself out, if you will, but tell your command, hey, I purchased a gun. It's going to be mandated that you report yourself and tell them, hey, I have a gun now. 521, require anyone living on DoD property and military housing to, quote, register all privately owned firearms. So now it's not just a matter of what guns you are purchasing on DoD property or on base. Now it's if you have any of your own personal firearms with you, now you have to, quote, register them. So you're going to enter any previously purchased firearms into this illegal database if you intend to have them on base. 522, establish DoD policy restricting the possession and storage of privately owned firearms in military barracks and dormitories. So now it's not going to be voluntary. Remember we just talked about the safes and having the discount on safes? I'm okay with it if it's voluntary. It's going to be mandated now that you lock that up. I don't think that's right. I think everybody should have their own choice and weigh out their own situation to determine if I need to lock these things up or not. In many cases, you wouldn't need to. If you're living on base and you're living in a dorm by yourself, there's no children around or no threat of anybody else that is a prohibited person. You're in the military, so there shouldn't be any, right? 523, prohibit the possession of privately owned firearms that are not related to the performance of official duties on DoD property by anyone who does not live on DoD property. So this means any visitors. So any visitors that are on DoD property will be prohibited from bringing their firearms onto DoD property. You hear what I'm saying? Don't go visit a person if you're concealed carrying or if you just want to go pick them up, you're driving by, whatever. Now it's going to be illegal for you to do that. And finally, 524, develop and implement a multimedia public education campaign to promote secure firearm storage. Again, guys, I don't have a problem offering up secure storage in any kind of a comprehensive training program. I don't have a problem if those are offered and you can accept them on a voluntary basis. It's when you mandate people do these things that it's not right. I found it somewhat odd that right below that one, this one here tells me that nothing in here is meant to actually curb or change or mitigate any kind of suicide ideas and ideation that you might have in somebody's mind. 525 reads, and this is ungun related, ensure that all shower curtain rods, window curtain rods, and closet rods installed in barracks, dormitories, and military housing can, quote, break away with excessive load. So your idea of suicide prevention is to make it harder for people to get firearms and to make curtain rods break away when somebody tries to hang themselves. Do you not see how reactionary your little plan here is? It's just like the whole gun control argument. You can take all the guns away you want from innocent people, but the guilty people and the criminals are the ones that don't listen. This is the same situation. We are after the fact here. Because if you take these tools away, you're not preventing them from committing suicide. Not in any kind of a way. If your intent is to make a curtain rod break away, that's your way of saying, I fully expect people to continue to try to hang themselves, but if we just make the curtain rods fail, at least they'll fail a little bit more, and it'll take them longer and make it harder for them to actually succeed at killing themselves. You've done nothing to take the mind away from wanting to kill themselves. Why don't you fix these problems? These problems exist exponentially more in the U.S. military. So the problem is yours. It's not guns. It's your culture. It's the whole thing that you have created that are making people take their own lives. Did anyone ever think at any point that maybe the screening process and the pool of people that were actually enlisting might be part of the problem? Congress and the military have attacked retirement and made retirement not near as lucrative and good to the enlisted people as it used to be. They've lowered performance standards. Now there's not any kind of real critical performance standards that are set out there, physically or mental. They're pretty much at that point where they're willing to accept anybody who is willing to enlist. Now they're woke. They have their token and diversity leanings, so now they're actually looking at trying to attract more people so that they can appear more diverse to everybody. Again, window dressing. The mental screenings of new recruits, absolute garbage. They're letting people in that would have normally and always failed in the past, mentally and physically. The federal government, Congress, and the U.S. military have done this. They have de-incentivized true warriors that we need in the military from signing up anymore. You think they want to be a part of this? Because now they've got people who are used to being pampered and coddled, and now they come in and have some kind of a strict routine that they have to adhere to, and now they don't want to, and they can't run home and cry to mommy tomorrow and do it. Suicide in the military is a product of their own making, and they don't want to admit it. They are going to continue to put task forces like this up and try to fool you and I as if they're doing something. I've got to say this time and time again, but until we get to a point, just like we do with mass shooters and rampage killers, until we get to a point where we're trying to figure out why the mind got to that place where it either wanted to take somebody else's life or their own life, we're not serious about solving any of this. But while we continue to blame guns and shower curtain rods as being the reason why people are taking their own lives, we are not serious about solving the problem. But once again, we're going to throw $2.4 million at this and have a crew of experts that are going to go in here, put something together so they can show the American people, look what they're doing. All that matters to them is the effort. The outcome is never important to them.
I'm sorry, I thought this was America.